The dive officer is the chief engineer responsible for managing the U-boat's depth, trim, bilge, and compressed air. Since one of the key aspects of a submarine is its ability to change from positive to negative buoyancy and back to positive when needed, the dive officer is extremely important to the safe operation of the U-boat. This is the dive officer's station. On the left are the forward dive planes, and on the right, the stern dive planes. Generally, changing the planes to down makes the U-boat go down, and up will make the U-boat go up. Use the A and D keys to change the forward planes, and the left arrow and right arrow to change the stern planes. The dial on the left is the shallow depth gauge. It provides an accurate reading of the depth from surface to 25 meters.
The dial on the right is the gross depth gauge. It provides the full depth. You can safely operate to test depth, which is 180 meters. Up to 200 meters is considered safe for the hull, but increases bilge fill rate. Anything below 200 carries the risk of damage and leaks. If your U-boat is damaged, the risk increases. If you are under fierce attack, it may be necessary to take the risk and dive below test depth.
All World War II submarines have some small leaks. The deeper the U-boat goes, the more water leaks into the boat and increases the bilge level. As the sub gains weight from the rising bilge level, it makes it more difficult to maintain depth at a given speed. The vertical gauge with the red liquid is the Papenburg gauge. The level of the red liquid shows you a very precise depth and is important for maintaining periscope depth. The vertical gauge on the right is the incline gauge or tilt gauge. The blue liquid indicates the posture of the U-boat fore and aft. When the blue liquid rises above the centre mark, the bow of the boat is lower than the stern, which indicates a diving posture. When the blue liquid drops below the centre mark, the bow of the boat is higher than the stern, which indicates a surfacing posture. The two gauges at the top are the shaft RPM meters used to determine the speed the U-boat is making. The U-boat in Wolfpack uses two large ballast tanks to dive and surface. These are the forward main ballast tank or MBT vent valves. It is the helmsman's duty to open these when the dive officer orders flood. These are the aft MBT vent valves. Opening the vents will fill the tanks and make the boat heavy, allowing it to dive under the surface. It is the navigator's duty to open these when the dive officer orders flood. The next station is the main ballast tank air manifold. The centre gauge is the compressed air volume in the U-boat. Compressed air is essential for blowing the water out of the tanks and achieving positive buoyancy. If you use up all of your air, you will find your ability to surface the U-boat greatly hindered, if not impossible. As the dive officer, you must manage the air supply very carefully. The green mark at 210 is the full mark. Two smaller gauges on either side of the bottom of the compressed air gauge are the forward and aft MBT levels. 0 is empty and 50 is full. When diving, opening the MBT vents will fill these tanks. When surfacing, turning the red wheel to the left will introduce air into the tanks and blow the water out, allowing the boat to rise. You must have the fore and aft MBT vents closed to blow the water out. If the vents are open, all of your air will rush out and the water will remain. The small gauges above the MBT level gauges are the MBT pressure gauges, which tell you how much air pressure is in the MBTs. To the right is the next station, the trim station. Currently in Wolfpack, this station can be used to make adjustments to the boat's buoyancy. The gauge on the left is the trim tank level. Generally, it should stay between 6 and 8. The gauge in the centre is the gross depth gauge, which reads the same as the large gauge at the dive plane station we've just covered. The gauge on the right is the 10-metre fine depth gauge. One complete spin of the needle represents 10 metres of depth. The green wheel on the left is the trim tank vent, which allows water into the trim tank, making the boat heavier. The green wheel on the right is the trim tank air valve, which blows water out of the trim tank and makes the boat lighter. If your trim tank is less than 4, you may be unable to dive the boat. In most cases, managing the U-boat's depth should be done with the dive planes. The trim tank comes into play when the U-boat is very deep and the bilge level is rising. The next station to the right of the trim tank is the negative tank. This is a small tank that will allow the U-boat to dive quickly. Generally, it should be full when on the surface.
Once the U-boat dives and is passing below 10 meters, the negative tank should be blown empty.
The dive officer may elect to leave the negative tank full under emergency dive conditions to assist the boat in reaching a deep depth more quickly. However, this will cause the use of considerably more compressed air to empty the tank later. The gauge on the left of the negative tank level and the gauge on the right are the compressed air supply volume, which is the same as the MBT station. The red wheel at the top left is the negative tank vent, which allows water into the tank. The red wheel on the right is the negative tank airflow control, which blows water out of the tank and makes the boat lighter. At the aft end of the control room is the U-boat's bilge pump. Water that leaks into the boat will collect in the bottom of the sub, the bilge. The deeper your sub goes, the greater the pressure on the hull, and the more water finds its way past seals and line connections into the boat. When your sub is deep and is being attacked with depth charges, even more water will leak and fill the bilge. In future versions of Wolfpack, some kinds of damage will also escalate the bilge level. Also, when running surfaced in heavy seas, with a wind spin greater of 10 or 12, leaving the bridge hatch open will also increase the bilge level. To lower or empty the bilge, you can turn on the bilge pump with the red handle. Bear in mind the pump makes a significant amount of noise and can easily be detected by nearby escort ships. The gauge on the left is the bilge level indicator. Anything over 10 means the bilge is full and water is entering the compartment floor. The gauge on the right is the compressed air supply volume, same as on the MBT and negative tank stations. Engaging the red handle will turn on the air compressor, filling the air flasks and rejuvenating the boat's air supply. The gauge on the right is the compressed air supply volume, which is the same as the MBT and other stations. The last station is the hull opening dive safe panel. When conducting a routine dive, the dive officer must check the hull opening panel before opening the vents and diving. When the lights are all lit, the sub is safe to dive. If a light is not lit, then that hull opening is not closed and is therefore not safe to dive. When the dive officer determines the boat is safe to dive, he or she will order flood and the helmsman will open the forward main ballast tank vents and the navigator will open the aft main ballast tank vents. The dive officer will be responsible for blowing negative and closing the vents when the U-boat is levelled at the ordered depth. Generally, once the U-boat is running submerged, to change depth you use the dive planes. In order for the dive planes to have an effect on depth, the U-boat must be moving. The faster the U-boat moves, the more quickly the boat can change depth. When cruising at periscope depth, careful and constant management of the planes is required to avoid sinking too deeply for the captain to see, or rising too high and exposing the U-boat to the enemy. Generally, periscope depth is between 10 and 15 metres. The observation scope is fully clear at 10 to 11 metres.
You will need to keep a depth of around 11 meters to allow the radio to function. Going much deeper than 11 meters and you may lose radio contact.
This concludes the Dive Officer training film. Use the link below to take the Qualification Exam and earn your Dive Officer Qualification certificate. Thank you for playing Wolfpack, good hunting, and don't forget to close the hatch.